In the spirit of full disclosure, I do have a vehicle, and that's going to frame some of the context of our conversation today. The average driver does about 25,000 kilometers per year. I do about half of that. I try to leave my car home as much as I possibly can. And I'm not really into cars, and no one is ever going to confuse me as being a car guy, and I don't advocate for the usage of cars. In fact, you're most likely to see me getting around just like this. I've been a huge advocate for any kind of cycling infrastructure and public transit project that has come down the pipe for decades. And I have a laundry list of social ailments that I think would be solved if people would just cycle more, but they don't. So this preamble is just so you know where I stand on the issue of transit projects, because today we're going to be looking at Canada's high-speed rail aspirations and Alto. So, I'm going to pick up the pace here, we're going to jump back into the studio, and we're going to crunch the numbers. Let's get into it. Here we are, back in the studio, and I would like to introduce the APID to you because you are probably new here, like everybody, because it's a new project. And the goal here is to talk about and discuss all manner of issue that come across our purview in our time and place. And the APID is a mixture of two words, ape and id, ape being us, a large primate, and id being our brains. The APID magazine is an independent outlet with a Canadian perspective. I think that's important, right? We're all elbows up these days, and we would like to look at things from the Canadian point of view, because one thing I have noticed, and I'm sure you have, is that the US really dominates the online infosphere. Whatever that is, the marketplace of ideas. We're so inundated with American perspectives. Anyway, looking at the ideas that shape our place and time, the APID is dedicated to the values of rational investigation. Rational being the key word. So if you're like me and you think that is important, please subscribe to the channel. And the promotion of good faith arguments, arguing in good faith. I think we can all agree that these days our public discourse has been hijacked by the screaming blue meanies of society. And I think we need to bring stuff back and bring a little, well, let's say, honesty back to our public discourse. Just as aside, we're going to go back to one of the great Canadian writers, Mordecai Richler, who mentioned a couple times that he wanted to be an honest observer of our time and place, and I think that's a great value, so we're going to quote Mordecai Richler here. I have elected to get it right. We will see. Let's talk about high-speed rail, the ultimate in rail. You'll see what that means in a second. In case you haven't heard, some of the big news in the big projects going on in Canada these days is the proposal to build a high-speed rail line between Toronto and Quebec City. This proposal we have been talking about in this country for decades, and it seems like it's an idea whose time has come. We shall see. We're going to start with a little bit of background and some news around this issue. If you haven't really been following it, maybe you've heard about it. I started to drill down on some of the details. But I should say from the outset, I am not an expert in any way in this area. I don't even know that much about the project. I'm not an insider of any sort. And I am more than willing to be proven wrong about anything to do with this issue. I'm just here to give you my 2 cents, because there are a couple of issues, questions, let's say, about this project that I haven't found an answer yet. And I would like to address them today. And we'll see if it gives some food for thought for anybody who's considering this project, because I think a lot of us are, right? So let's get into the background. Here's a quote from the government website here. It will create fast, frequent, and reliable service that uses mostly dedicated and electrified tracks with stations in Quebec City, Trois Rivieres, Laval, Montreal, Ottawa, Peterborough, and Toronto. The official name of this high-speed rail service will be Alto. Okay, so you can visit the Government of Canada website, which has some information there. There's also an official Alto webpage. Any links that you see in my notes here will be down below in the description of the video if you want to do your own background reading. Here are some of the details, though. The government announced $3.9 billion toward the planning of it. The ground is set to be broken for construction in 5 years. Okay, I found a number of articles discussing high-speed rail in general, some going back a few years, making different points about it. I don't know if I agree with them all, and I think you will. The reasons for that will be as follows in this video, so I don't want to get into them now, but just if you're looking for sources, you can find those links below. Billion Dollar Builds, a YouTube channel, did a good breakdown of more of the technical side and the construction plans on this, and that was pretty in-depth and had lots of good information. The Agenda with Steve Paikin had a good conversation with a couple of insiders on this project, or at least consultants or analysts who know about it. So they had some good information for the public. However, that's what led me to this video, in fact, was a couple of points or questions that came up with me that I was thinking about that I haven't been able to find the answer to, and that's what I want to address in this video. So that's the background of the proposal. Let's get into a few of the arguments. And I'm going to start off with something that is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, I have to admit. Okay, proposition number 1 is false equivalencies. I know it's social media, and it has to be taken with a big grain of salt, but very often you hear people making comparisons between North America and Canada and other cities around the world. And I always take umbrage at those comparisons because they never apply. And one of the things I think as Canadians, if we're going to go ahead with this project, we have to consider is that we have to get away from the FOMO effect, as I see it. Part of the arguments that people make online, at least, is that, well, if they have it over there, then we should have it over here, or we are horribly backwards and archaic. And I think that leads to a lot of false equivalencies. And one of them is the differing circumstances. In the way of context, I lived in Beijing in China for about 10 years. So I'm going to be drawing on China a lot here because it's something I know a little bit about and I have some personal experience with, but also that it's a good comparison. Well, not a comparison. It's a good contrast because China has a lot of high-speed trains and are building a lot of infrastructure, but it also exists in a very different context and circumstance to Canada. And I think we have to take those to heart. In Canada, we view trains as a sign of advancement, and that's very reasonable because they are. And in China, they do as well. They're very proud of their high-speed trains, and they should be. A very extensive transportation system, which is very helpful to the people of China, and I've enjoyed it myself, and I think they're wonderful. No doubt about it. However, if you ask a lot of Chinese people, would you rather take a train or a car, they would go with a car. Well, an automobile in China has social status, much like it does here, and given a choice, most people would like to buy a car. And as we are sort of moving away from the automobile, I don't know that that particular value has taken hold yet. The other side of it is things like alternative transportation, like bicycles. We view that as kind of the enlightened alternative, at least in a lot of people's minds, in terms of urban planning. China is moving away from that. They view bicycles as a kind of peasant's transit. When I arrived in 2003, there were bicycles everywhere. By 2008, they were gone. You would see them around the campuses, maybe a few people here and there, but nobody wanted to ride them. And so that's a bit of a flip in mentality, and that's why the situation in China and Canada cannot be compared exactly. They are not equivalent that way. The other thing is car ownership, as out of control as it has become in North America, it's also out of control everywhere else in the world. The people outside of North America don't have an enlightened view about cars compared to us. That's a bit of a myth. It is a status symbol and a show of wealth and development, and it is. Needless to say, our obsession with the automobile is a victim of its own success, I would say. One of the characteristics of humans is that you can't ask them to eschew the trappings of wealth until they tire of them, which means you can't ask people to get rid of something that has downsides until they go through it themselves, because people don't think that way. If they want something, they want it until they tire of it. That's kind of how we think. So asking North Americans to take a train instead of a car is a tall order, simply because we have been building towards automobile ownership for 100 years now or more. But the fact that it is hard to do is not because the rest of the world is more enlightened than we are. Asking people to give up their car in most places in the world is a tall order. Everyone loves their car, but only until they don't. Alternatives to the automobile are important, as I said at the beginning of this video, but they are not a panacea. One of the myths that is being propagated around the internet is that if you have trains in your city, that it somehow magically disappears all of the traffic. It's not true. Most of those cities that have really sophisticated train systems also have abysmal traffic. And that's because the cities are large and they scale both at the same time. Cities in Canada are smaller. We have trouble scaling multiple things at the same time. We don't have 20 million people, even in Toronto. It's only like 5 or 6 million people in the entire GTA. That's a very different context. And I can tell you from experience, if you spend 5 minutes in the traffic in Beijing, you will come running back to Toronto despite their high-speed trains. So speaking of that, let's talk about scale. Because if you're going to build a big mega project, you have to scale it to make it economically viable. Everybody understands that. The question I'm looking at here is, can Canada scale such a big project and make it viable? Comparisons again. What's the difference between China and Canada? Well, it's population. It's hard for Canadians who haven't visited that place, and a lot of Chinese Canadians will tell you, 1.4 billion people looks very different. To give you a bit of an anecdote here, in Beijing, they were building a new subway line in my neighborhood, which was very much looked forward to. And I think it was the first or second day it opened, maybe the first day. From the get-go, it was packed to the gills. People crammed in everywhere. And you're like, well, where the hell did all these people come from? What were they doing for the last, 4,000 years? Well, they were getting around by other means. Canada has never had that issue. That never happens in Canada when it comes to subways, for example. So the issue here, the other reason why you can't compare China to Canada is because China is developing into its population, which means it has its population there and it's building the infrastructure for it. Whereas Canada populates into its development. Okay, we're at different stages here. We build things before the population needs it, and then there's a lag time before it achieves scale. And that's why we're constantly complaining about things like, well, empty bike lanes and empty subways and stuff like this. It's like, yeah, it's because we're planning 20 years ahead of time and we're waiting for the population to fill in. So those are differences because one is pent-up demand and the other is induced demand. In China, they have pent-up demand for everything. In Canada, we have induced demand, which means we're building things and putting the requisite carrots and sticks in order to get people to do it. Bicycles are a good example of that, right? Slow growth, slow uptake, et cetera, et cetera. I would say the only time that induced demand was not a problem in terms of transportation was the automobile. People jumped on that as quick as they possibly could because, let's face it, a car is better than a horse. The upshot to this comparison is that China can scale anything even with low participation rates. Canada requires very high participation rates to scale anything. The one reason we're so good at hockey is we have a lot of hockey players. Scale is difficult to achieve in a country with a small population like Canada's. It's always been an issue we deal with. Okay, the other side of it is Canada has not had much success alleviating problems with induced demand. Speaking of transit again, I don't know if any of you remember the Ride the Rocket program back in the 80s. The TTC had to advertise to get people to get on the subway. They were largely underused. Most people drove. The city was just growing into its use. And then by the 90s, people were complaining there wasn't enough transit, right? So this is the sort of populating into your development kind of issue again. So even if the data show that Canadians would give up their car as given an alternative, that may be more poignant as it relates to local transit. It may not represent enough for the high-speed rail line going between cities. And we're going to talk about that in a sec. All right, comparison part 2, car ownership. This was one of the big issues about comparing North America to other parts of the world, specifically Canada to other parts of the world. U.S. car ownership, just in terms of context, 850 per 1,000 people. It's very high. Canada's is pretty close at 707 per 1,000. I think New Zealand came in as the country with the highest car ownership rates. But suffice it to say, countries like New Zealand, the United States, Canada, these are the top 5 for car ownership rates in the world. And why does that matter? It matters because if you have a car, you're going to drive it. It's pretty simple, right? So you can find some of that information here that I found. Vehicle registrations in 2022, pretty high, 26.3 million. What this means is that given, cars are used for families and other types of rideshare things, more than 90% of Canadians, I would say almost everyone, has access to a vehicle at any given time. So that's a very high take-up rate or saturation rate for automobiles in Canada. Looking at China, it's a very different story. China's car ownership rates is 200 per 1,000. That was in 93 per 1,000 in 2018. In 2023, 1 in 2 urban households and 1 in 3 rural households owned a car. The only time, so looking at the projections, China is going to achieve 400 per 1,000 by 2040. So that's half of Canada's car ownership rates, and we're not even there yet. So the point of this is that in any given jurisdiction in China, there are a legion of people who don't have a vehicle and would need a train to travel intercities, between cities. So why is this point important? Well, it seems logical. If everybody has a car to drive, inducing them to spend money on a train is a tall order. You're asking them to do something that seems counterintuitive. If you're in a country like China, where you've got scale, very large cities, and a large portion of that population don't have access to a vehicle, they would take a train for intercity travel. Seems very reasonable. So that point alone seems to me a critical juncture in the discussion about this high-speed rail plan, because we're going to add a little bit more complexity to this issue. Let's take a couple other comparisons. These are not very scientific. I just did a little survey of these issues, but again, thinking of scale, consider other common places. Tokyo, of course, Japan, very famous for its high-speed trains. But if you look at the scale compared to geography, the Tokyo region has 41 million people. That's the entire population of Canada, and it's this big compared to Quebec. So what does that mean? It means huge population density, like massive population density. This is the Tokyo region compared to the Greater Toronto area, which only has 6 million people at its extent. So, scale, concentration, think about it. Here's another comparison, Paris to Marseille. France also has some very nice trains. It has a very elaborate train system. Europe is very known for its train system. Of course, very nice to travel in there. And yeah, absolutely. No argument there. However, looking at how it compares to Canada, France has 68.29 million people. That's about 30 million people more than Canada. This is an equivalent trip to Alto, the proposed line in Canada from Paris to Marseille, with a little side jaunt there. What is that? 773 kilometers. So if we compare that to Toronto to Quebec, that's 4.5 hours, 3 hours to Montreal, an extra hour and a half to Quebec City, 805 kilometers. And the entire population of Ontario and Quebec combined is 25.2 million. And if you compare the size of France to even Ontario, you see it's a minuscule place with such a high population density. So the point is, in France, a high-speed rail line going between these two cities of an equal distance is a transnational line. It covers the entire country. It serves tens of millions of people along its route that can get on and off. Not to mention tourists. Toronto to Quebec City is our most populated area of the country, but it's still hyper-regional. It doesn't even serve the whole province, or both of them. It serves a very small segment of it. So we have to consider these things. I'm sure they have considered them, the experts. I'm sure they've calculated these things. At least I hope they have, because I haven't been able to find any proposals as to who they think is going to ride this train, or how many butts are going to be in seats on any given ride. I'm not sure. Let's close out the comparison proposals with a couple conclusions. China has a larger population of people who require a train for intercity travel. It has an infinitely larger absolute number of people to create scale. So it's not just relative, it's absolute. Canada is unique in the world with its huge landmass, small population, low density, and high car ownership rates. Population density, capacity to scale, geographic concentration, demand. The Toronto to Quebec City corridor may not have enough of those to make it feasible. We shall see. In trying to identify who the rail line is going to serve, the cohort dwindles even further. So we have already considered that the region does not have the concentration and density to sustain the line, potentially. I could be wrong about that. We also have determined that the large majority of people have access to a car. So, simple proposition here, asking people to pay for a train ticket and leave a car at home that they are also paying for. This train had better be very special. It should be giving out free booze. The train's terminal is at the train station in downtown Toronto and in the center of Quebec and Montreal and all of its stops. And you live, I don't know, Richmond Hill. Are you going to walk out of your house, walk past the car that you're paying for with all your luggage, load yourself into a taxi? What are you going to do? Get all the way downtown? What's that going to be? $45, $50? Who the hell knows? And if you've got 2 or 3 people with you, that adds to the cost and trouble, just so you can get on a train, get all the way to Montreal or Quebec City or Peterborough, wherever it is you're going, and then get off the train with your luggage, go to another place, pay an extra fee. Or are you going to walk out your front door, load your stuff in your trunk, put all your people in the car and just drive there? You're going to drive. Very few people are going to go through that kind of trouble. In order for the train to be viable, either A, you have to have no access to a car, or B, you have to live within the terminal's area to make it convenient enough to bother. So even if you do save a few hours on the trip, Okay. So a simple cost analysis here. Let's take a very generous estimation. Let's say you drive one of those massive pickup trucks, and it's a real gas guzzler, and you drive it all the way to Quebec City. It's going to cost you, 1 or 2 tanks of gas, even if it's 3. Let's make it very generous. 3 tanks of gas. I doubt it's that much. But, you're looking at $180, $200 maybe in gas just to go one distance. Current Via Rail train ticket is $272 or so. It varies a little bit. The Alto fare will be higher. And the ticket price is going to apply to everybody in your party. So if you're traveling with people, you're doubling and tripling that. Not to mention the loss of flexibility as to your itinerary. And if you have an electric vehicle, which is the way things are going, this calculation is a non-starter. Would you rather pay $0 in gas or a little bit in charging fees, or several $100s on a train ticket? The numbers just don't add up. So the appeal to the train would be to business travelers who are in the cities where the terminals are. They live close or work close to there. Maybe they don't have a vehicle. Maybe they're tourists, of course. That's definitely what we're going to be talking about. And the adventure of the train ride to some will appeal for a while, but after a while, the economics will take over and people will make more rational decisions. Also, the high-speed rail is still going to be competing not only with cars, lower fare buses, short-haul flights out of the island airport, for example, on Porter or something like that. So the point here is that the economics, the simple cost calculations don't make a lot of sense for your individual person. It's not to say that no one would patronize Alto. The question is, would it be sufficient to justify the expenditure? And over the growth period of the population, are we going to grow into this development and into this project scale-wise? Otherwise, it's going to become a money pit and an albatross across the shoulders of the taxpayer. Which leads us to Proposition 3. There is already a train that runs between Toronto and Quebec City. It's the Via line. We can use that as sort of a baseline to see where this is going to go. Simple comparisons is that the high-speed rail will be about 3 times faster, which is nice. All right, $268, $286, $272 for a 9-hour trip. Now, naturally, one thing we're concerned about is whether this train is going to be supplemented by government funding until eternity. We shall see. As it stands, the Via line is subsidized by the taxpayer. Here it is here. Total government funding, $773 million. It runs at a loss. You can see in this chart here, sorry, it's a little small, but we are subsidizing each passenger on the Corridor East line to the tune of $55.73 per ticket or per passenger. There's a shortfall of a lot. So basically, to keep Via running, we are subsidizing it with taxpayer money. The question is, will the shortcomings of the existing line be compensated by the new high-speed line? Obviously, it's going to be faster. You hope it's going to be newer and nicer, and it's going to run on time, and it will have a dedicated line and all of that stuff. So those aspects of the train ride are going to improve, and that would definitely be appealing to a lot of people. But again, the question is, are we just adding another subsidy that we have to pay to the Alto line? I'm not necessarily against that kind of thing if it has some knock-on benefits. Those things can sometimes pay for themselves. There is such a thing as dividends that are paid over time. And if we can do a calculation and it seems to be viable, then sure, I'm all for it. I think that's totally fine. I'm not against government funding and subsidizing these types of projects. I just think we need to have a little more of a concrete number floating around the public sphere before everybody gets all excited about this project. Okay, the question is, would a high-speed or even high-frequency line shift the transportation priorities of the corridor to countermand the competition of alternatives and the prevalence of automobiles and what is sure to be a higher price? We shall see. A lot of people are arguing that this is an important transit feature to reduce traffic along the 401 and the Trans-Canada going between Toronto and Quebec City. I don't think this is going to reduce traffic at all, even if it reduces it by 1 or 2%. There's just not enough riders to reduce that many number of cars. And besides, a lot of people who take the train won't have a car anyway, as we've already sort of argued. And that's a rounding error compared to the amount of traffic that travels that corridor on the roads. So I'm not sure that that's necessarily a good argument for this line. And again, I'm not an expert on transportation or this line or anything like that. I'm totally happy to be proven wrong. Anybody that has any information about that is contradictory, I will accept it. Sounds great. Proposition 3, and the final proposition, I promise we're going to wrap this up in a second. We should still build the line, but we should repurpose our intentions or reposition our intentions. Question number 1. Why is this line not being proposed for Hamilton and Niagara Falls? This seems to me a huge oversight. And I reached out to the city of Hamilton and the city of Niagara Falls. I kind of hope I send a message to the right person. I haven't heard back as of this recording, but I was simply asking the question, are these two cities in the running? Why aren't they included thus far? Do they have ambitions to be included? Is there a technical or some other reason why they aren't included in the line? But to me, this seems like a huge oversight. I can't imagine why nobody considered that Quebec City on one end and Niagara Falls on the other end are two bucket list terminals to anchor the line. If you're going around the world and telling people we've got a high-speed rail, you want to tell them it's at Niagara Falls, because people will go, ooh, that sounds nice. The other thing is American tourists can walk across the bridge, even if they're so inclined, and get on the train, and that would be really appealing. You could be in Buffalo one day and be in Quebec City by the afternoon. How is that not appealing? It makes no sense. Where are all the tourists going? They go to Niagara Falls and Niagara on the Lake. Hamilton itself has a lot of great features. It's surrounded by waterfalls. It has great hiking. It's on the escarpment. It has part of the escarpment in it. And it's got a lot of nice restaurants and architecture in the downtown. It would be a great boon to the city of Hamilton. And it would be a great stop along the line. I mean, Peterborough's nice. Hamilton's just as nice. You know, what are we doing here? This doesn't make any sense. So I haven't been able to find anything, any research, any proposal that mention this aspect. And I'm hoping somebody will come up with a response. And I would like to see it extended to Niagara Falls. And the reason is this. The reposition of our intentions is to get away from thinking about this line as a transportation for locals. I think we should repurpose it to appeal to tourists. And the reason, and not that it would change the line so much, but we would, facilitate tourists' aims over our own. That might mean better luggage capacity, more entertainment, nicer restaurants, whatever it is, because, well, who in the corridor is here with a lot of money to spend and no car? Well, that's a tourist, right? They want to take advantage of these things. And when you think about it, the number of attributes you can apply to the corridor as a trip is dizzying. You could be in Niagara Falls in one day, Quebec City in the next day, Montreal, Toronto, you could be up camping, you could be at the Thousand Islands, you can be on a wine tour. It could be one of the marquee travel destinations in the world if we just advertise it that way. And just spitballing here, maybe you get Air Canada to pay for one of the train cars, or you get Air Transat or WestJet to get another one, and they roll it into their ticket prices where you get off the plane in Toronto or Montreal, you get on the train, and you're zipping to another city, and you can cover the whole distance in 3 hours, maybe 5, if you're going to Niagara Falls. I just don't see why we're not thinking about it this way. That seems like it would be suddenly more economically viable. There would be more money coming in. It would still be available for the locals, of course. There's no change there. And you wouldn't even need to change the plans so much. You're just going to extend it. And it would also be a boon for Hamilton, St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, that whole region, the wine region there. It seems crazy that we're not thinking about this. So I'm hoping somebody has a suggestion as to why this is not happening. And I'm hoping somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who is involved in this project might pass this proposition along to them and just say, why are we not doing this? And see if that can't come about. And if you are on City Council or you're in Niagara Falls or Hamilton and you happen to know something about this, please put it in the comments because I have come up dry. Well, that just about wraps things up here for me at the APID and my little video essay on our big plans to make a high-speed rail line here in Canada. It's all very exciting. I'm going to entreat you again to subscribe to the channel. As you can see, I'm new and just starting this channel out. And I want to build a community. because that will compel me, cajole me, convince me to do bigger and better things down the road. And I hope you will be part of it. If you have any questions, well, you probably don't have any questions because I'm not an expert. If you have any comments or some good information about this subject, please put it in the comments below, and then I can refer back to them and I'll bring them up again. That sounds great. Thank you for joining today. We'll see you all next time. Take care.